The night my son was born prematurely and breathing through a machine, my family was ready to give up on me. He was 7 weeks early, tiny and blue, and only I knew he would survive. The NICU was full of plastic bassinets and alarm clocks blaring inexorably. I held a paper cup of warm coffee and my phone, ready to call or text my family. "Can you come over?" I asked my mother first. "Just for an hour. I need support. A voice that knows me." There was silence, then she sighed. "It's late. Your stepdad is asleep. Call your sister." My sister wasn't even pretending. "We have school in the morning. The baby is in the hospital, right? They have nurses." She said nurses, the way people say strangers. I tried calling my aunt. "You wanted to do this yourself," she reminded me as gently as a slap. "And I don't drive after dark." The nurse touched my elbow. Visiting hours were over. "Anyone want to drive you home?" I nodded and dialed again. Outside, the autumn air tasted like metal. I called my mother again and saw the porch light go out and the third ring go to voicemail. I saw her curtains move. "We'll talk in the morning," the message said. Rest. Where to rest? On the side of the road? On a bus bench? Across from the maternity ward or at the train station? "Please," I said when the nurse finally picked up again, "I just need help for one night." She exhaled. "I should have planned better." The line went dead. A cabbie with kind eyes gave me a free ride home. I slept sitting up in my coat, thinking about my son. I went back to the neonatal intensive care unit, back to the glass box where my boy's hands clenched and unclenched as if he were counting. The social worker asked about my support system. "It's complicated," I said, which was kinder than the truth. I was young then. Now I'm a grandmother, and I know that some debts don't live on paper. They live in refrigerators filled or not, on trips taken or not, on phones answered or let go to voicemail. That night, I started keeping a personal ledger. Not for petty revenge, for clarity, for the day when payment was due. The cabbie's name was Dell. He waited until I was climbing the stairs, then handed me his business card through the open door. "Call me when you're ready to come back," he said. "There's no meter between a mother and a child." I don't know if that was kindness or pity. I wrote Dell in my ledger, in a column I hadn't yet named. Morning made everything seem more formal. Consent forms, tiny blood pressure monitors. In the blue light, my son's skin looked like porcelain. I learned a few personal words. Desat, kangaroo. The first time I was given him to hold, he fit into the crook of my arm like a warm loaf of bread. I whispered his name into the soft tongue of his ear and promised that we would leave together. I called my mother every day. Every day she asked, "Any change?" As if we were waiting on weather. The one time I mentioned the late taxi and the hard bench, she said, "You made your choices." I wrote that down exactly. You made your choices. The third night, 2 women from my building knocked with casseroles and hand-me-down onesies, strangers with spare keys to kindness. "We heard," they said, in the way women hear through walls and laundry rooms and the slow rumor of shared hallways. Mrs. Alvarez insisted on taking the night shift once a week, sitting in the NICU lounge while I slept on 2 chairs pushed together. She had 7 grandchildren and a voice like chamomile tea. When I tried to give her gas money, she tapped the ledger I kept in my head. "This isn't a debt," she said. "This is a circle." On the 5th day, a man in a suit appeared at the end of my son's isolette. "I'm with Child Protective Services," he said, showing a badge. His tone was practiced gentleness, the kind that expects the worst. "We received a call expressing concern about your baby's safety." The room tilted. "From who?" "I can't disclose that." The caseworker's face was a stone. He asked me questions in a whisper away from the machines. Drugs, partner, housing, support. The answers were simple. No, no, yes, barely. He looked around. The NICU was as clean as an airport. We're required to follow up, he said, and set a time to visit my apartment. He left behind a paper with my name spelled wrong. I dialed my mother as soon as he was gone. Did you call CPS? I asked without greeting. She gasped like I'd accused her of arson. What? Of course not. Why would I do that to my own grandchild? Because you didn't want to come. You're hysterical, she said. You're overtired. This is why you shouldn't have tried to do everything alone. When a lie is thin, it makes a sound. I heard it. I wrote the date in my ledger, then wrote the letters CPS next to it and underlined them so hard the pen bled through. The home visit happened while the NICU machine clicked and my son's oxygen held steady like a tiny stubborn flame. I made coffee I couldn't afford and laid out every form and bracelet and schedule like armor. Del sat in the kitchen because Mrs. Alvarez told him to. No woman faces that alone, she said, and swatted my hand when I tried to clear the table. The caseworker walked through my rooms and wrote things down. He frowned at the peeling paint and nodded at the crib as if it could take notes too. He asked about my family. I answered precisely. They live 20 minutes away and have chosen not to help. His pen hesitated. He looked at Del, a man in a cabbie jacket with hands like shovels, and then at the casseroles labeled in looping handwriting. You have community, he said. He closed his notebook. We'll close the case when the baby is discharged. Call if anything changes. Days stack differently in a hospital. They don't pass. They accumulate. My son gained ounces like treasure. I learned how to thread a feeding tube with hands that didn't shake. The social worker helped me find a pump that didn't sound like a metronome of dread. The first time the doctor said, "Go home," I cried in front of everyone, even the couple whose twins were still coughing at the bottom of their lungs. I took my son home in a borrowed car seat and a hat that covered his whole head. Del led the way up the stairs with the diaper bag. Mrs. Alvarez had taped a red ribbon over my door. Protection, she said, and a little bit of luck. My mother came by the next afternoon with a pack of diapers and an expression like she was tasting something sour. How long until he's normal? She asked, peering at his tiny face. My sister hovered behind her, scrolling her phone, bored by the miracle. I offered coffee. They refused. They stood in my living room with their arms crossed and their purses clenched and told me what I was doing wrong. He's going to be spoiled if you hold him that much, my mother said. You'll have to go back to work sooner than you think, my sister added. They didn't notice the folder on the counter where I kept every refusal, every voicemail, every call log. I had started collecting proof of the way other people collect recipes. That folder grew thicker in the years that followed. It held receipts and notes and small acts of mercy that were not theirs. When my son came down with RSV at 2 and I slept on a hospital bench with my feet on my diaper bag, Del brought me a winter coat from a thrift store because he said mine wasn't warm enough. When I took on extra shifts at the hardware store, Mrs. Alvarez sat on my couch and folded tiny socks into pairs that made me cry. When the rent crept up like mold, I learned to mend, to barter, to negotiate. I returned carts at the grocery store for an extra $2 and spent those dollars on printer paper to keep my ledger tidy. We reached for ordinary and grabbed it with both hands. My son learned to run before he learned to pronounce his R's. He grew into knees scab brown from summer. He had a laugh like a pot spilling over. He called Del Grandel as a joke and then never stopped. On the first day of kindergarten, I cried into a paper napkin while he lined up with a backpack that barely held his whole self. Because you should know the good parts, too. The ledger didn't just keep sorrows. It kept the names of people who stood up when the line of helpers kept thinning. I wrote down the school nurse who called me first when he fell on the playground. I wrote down the firefighter who installed a proper smoke detector in my apartment because he didn't like the way the old one sang to itself at night. I wrote down the landlord who finally replaced the bathroom ceiling after I learned the words tenant rights and said them like a prayer. There were setbacks, of course. I found out about the CPS call years after it happened, in a way that left no space for doubt. I filed a request for my case file under a law I'd learned about from a woman in the laundromat whose cousin worked in a legal clinic. When the manila envelope arrived, I opened it at the kitchen table while my son did his math homework. I read the report twice and the contact log 3 times. The initial report listed concerned maternal relative and described me as unstable, unprepared, possibly using substances, and refusing family support. Refusing family support. I closed my eyes. I could see the shape of my mother's mouth as she said those words to a stranger. I could hear the particular flattened vowels she uses when she is being believed. My son looked up when I swore under my breath, sharp and short, a word I don't keep on my tongue often. Bad math? He asked. Worse, I said, but we're still going to solve it. I put the report in the folder. The folder went into a file box I labeled with a word that made sense to me. Proof. Life kept happening. My son grew into a lanky teenager who ate like a winter and told me he wanted to be someone who helped at the scene before the ambulance even stopped rolling. A paramedic, he said, eyes lit from the inside. I know what it feels like when a machine is your best friend. I want to be the person who tells you that machine is your friend. He studied. He worked. He passed his exams. He joined the firehouse as a volunteer and came home with smoke in his hair and stories that sat between us like hot stones. I watched him stand at the door of other people's emergencies and knew we had made it all the way from the NICU to this, my boy on his own 2 feet, carrying his own weight, his hands steady on other people's pulses. I am moving quickly, because that is how I lived it. 1 minute you are a woman crying into a paper cup in a hospital. The next you are someone who knows exactly where the spare blankets are and how to stay quiet when the sirens go by. In the spaces between, I learned a second skill, notarizing documents in a beige office above a vacuum repair shop, a side job Dell found for me through one of his regulars. You've got a head for paper, he said. Might as well get paid for it. A head for paper will teach you things. It will show you how power disguises itself in signatures and dates. It will tell you that people can love you and still try to write you out of your own life if the line looks neat enough and the ink is expensive. It will give you a calm that sounds like confidence when someone pushes forms across a table and says, "Don't worry, just sign." We didn't see my mother much. She sent holiday cards with photos staged at a studio, all of them standing in front of a fake fireplace in matching sweaters. In the captions, she wrote things like, "So blessed and family is everything." When my son graduated, she came early, sat in the second row, and cried a little as if sorrow were a garnish. She hugged him so tight I could hear his ribs creak, then turned to me and said, "Aren't you glad I called when I did? It made you step up." Sometimes you can feel your heart bruise without breaking. I kissed my boy's cheek and told him to go take pictures. When my mother tried to tuck herself into his new story, I stepped gently between them. "He knows who carried him," I said, and even I didn't know whether I meant his infant body or the years afterwards. My ledger stayed in the file box and I stayed busy. My son got hired full-time and I stopped sleeping through the night when the dispatch tone lived on my kitchen counter. He fell in love with a woman named Maya, who was sharp and kind and didn't flinch at the mess of the world. They had their own baby boy in a spring that felt like absolution. I held my grandson in a hospital room that did not vibrate with alarms and whispered the same promise into his ear that I had whispered into his father's. We leave together. Becoming a grandmother rearranged something in me that had already been rearranged. I had always been soft where he was concerned. Now I was armor. I love that child with the steady tenderness of someone who has seen machines refuse to bargain. I stocked their freezer, held the baby so they could shower, sat on the floor with him while he learned to sit up and toppled against my legs with a startled laugh each time. The circle misses. Alvarez talked about kept turning. The call came from my sister first. We hadn't spoken in months. I picked up because one day somebody will need you, and not answering is a habit I never caught. "We need help with Mom," she said without preamble. "She fell. It's not serious, but she's off. I can't take time off work, and the co-pays are ridiculous. What do you need?" She hesitated. "Money, and maybe you could take her for a while. Your place is closer to her doctor's. It'll just be until we figure things out." I looked at my grandson gnawing on a wooden ring. He looked back, all liquid eyes and certainty. The ledger shifted in my mental drawer. "I'll come by," I said. "We'll talk." My mother opened the door in a robe with the price tag still hanging from the sleeve. The house smelled like stale flowers. She had always been fastidious. Now the sink held a tower of dishes, and the mail lay in drifts on the buffet. She hugged me with the cautious affection of old times. "You look tired," she said. "Grandmotherhood will do that." We sat at the dining table. My sister arrived late, flustered, and talking about traffic like it was a personality. She spread her hands. "So," she said, and then did that thing with her eyebrows that used to mean I should feel sorry for her before I knew why. "We need a plan." My mother nodded. "I went to the day program. They did a memory test. It's silly. They asked me to draw a clock like anyone uses those anymore. But whatever, they think I should have someone monitoring." Monitor. The word hung in the air like a camera. I looked at the stack of bills, at the medical discharge papers, at the gleaming brochure for an assisted living facility with a pool no one swam in. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" I asked. My sister took out her phone and opened a document. "We just need you to sign on as her medical proxy. It's easier if it's you because you're not working full-time and you already know forms. And there's a small matter of the house. We'd like to put it in my name now to avoid probate. It's just a transfer on death. Nothing changes for her." I sat very still. I could feel my heart take a step backward and another step forward. "Bring me the papers," I said. "Let me read." She slid them across the table. "Durable power of attorney. Transfer on death deed." A blank line waiting under my name. "We thought you'd be honored," my sister said too brightly. "Family first." Family first. I flipped the page. Irrevocable. I looked up at my mother. "Do you want this?" She fussed with the tag on her sleeve. "Your sister says it's best. She's been helping with the bills. She has the boys. It's fair." I touched the edge of the table where a ring had been permanently carved into the wood by a too-hot dish in 1993. I saw that night like a photograph. My mother's laughter, my sister's eyes, my plate cooling in the sink. I also saw a man in a NICU doorway with a badge and a script. I heard my mother's voice telling him I had refused her help while the ink on my request for it was still wet. The ledger opened like a mouth. "I'll take the power of attorney," I said, "but it will be medical only and durable, not financial, and the house stays in your name while you're alive. If you want to assign a transfer on death, you can assign it to both of us or neither. But I will not sign you out of your life while you can still write your name." My sister blinked. "Why are you being difficult?" "Because I can read." "It would be easier if—" "Easier for who?" I asked, and the room shook a little. My mother dabbed at her eyes. "Don't fight. I'm tired." "We won't fight," I said. "We'll write it down." I took out my own folder from my bag. Clean paper, blue ink, a list of what I would and would not do. I would go to medical appointments. I would manage the pillbox. I would file paperwork she couldn't understand anymore. I would not give my sister unfettered access to anyone else's bank account. I would not sign a house away under the name of convenience. I would not forget. We lived that way for a while. I scheduled neurologist appointments and sat in waiting rooms where time didn't belong to anybody. I learned the names of medications that made her sleepy and ones that made her mean. I put grab bars in the shower. I cleared out the rug she kept tripping over that had belonged to her mother and rolled it carefully under the bed. My sister came on Sundays to bring flowers and ask for receipts. A funny thing happens when you do the right thing without applause. You get very strong. You get plain. You stop needing to be believed by the people who have never believed you. You begin to understand that the ledger isn't a punishment. It's a map. It shows you where not to walk again. Spring turned to summer, and with it came a new ripple. My sister's husband left with a quiet suitcase and a note on the counter that said it isn't anyone's fault. Suddenly, her house had an empty chair and a stack of bills she hadn't anticipated. She called sobbing, and the first thing out of her mouth was not, "Are you okay, Mom?" It was the mortgage. "Sell the house," I said. "Downsize. You don't need 4 bedrooms." "It's not that simple." "Why not?" "Because I don't want to," she hissed, and then the tears turned into anger like a magician's scarf dot. The next Sunday, she arrived with a different lawyer's card. "He says we can protect the house from Medicaid recovery if we transfer it now. Everyone does it. It's smart." "Medicaid pays for long-term care when you're poor," I said. "If Mom needs it, it's because she needs it. We don't hide assets so we can pretend we're poor. We pay for care, or we apply honestly." "Why are you like this?" "Because a man with a badge once asked me if I had refused support. I won't be that person, on paper or in truth." She left in a fury I recognized from childhood. The slammed door, the unresolved air whipping around like a storm trying to become itself. I made tea for my mother and sat with her while she stroked the teacup with 2 fingers as if it were a cat. "You always were the stubborn one," she said, smiling a little. I kissed her forehead and tucked the blanket around her knees. "I learned it from watching you," I said. She didn't remember enough to be offended. You might think this is where the story ends, with me being the reliable daughter and my sister the opportunist, and my mother drifting down a river none of us could steer. That would be tidy. It would also be wrong. The real turn came on an ordinary Thursday, when I drove my mother to a clinic for a follow-up. The nurse practitioner, a brisk woman with an immaculate bun, asked my mother who the president was. My mother named a singer from the 1970s. The nurse smiled and wrote something down. She asked my mother to draw a clock. My mother drew a sun with lines shooting out of it and wrote "clock" underneath in careful capitals. "I'd like to recommend an evaluation for assisted living," the nurse said to me in the hall. "It will take some pressure off you both." "I'm not the one resisting help," I said. "I'm the one insisting on the right kind." "I wish all daughters were like you," she said, with that particular weary affection nurses reserve for people who sign their names without complaint. "But it's not always daughters." 2 weeks later, my sister invited me and my mother for a spa day. She used that light little tone that means she has already planned the afternoon. I packed a bag with snacks and my mother's favorite hand lotion. When we pulled into the parking lot, the building wasn't a spa. It was a memory care facility with a water feature in the lobby and a bowl of hard candies no one wanted to eat. The administrator met us with lemon water and a clipboard. "We have a room on hold," my sister said cheerfully. "Just for a trial, so you can see how you like it, Mom." "I don't like it," my mother said immediately. "I like my chair and my window and my blanket with the holes." "I know, but I don't like it," my mother repeated louder. I turned to the administrator. Do you accept residents whose medical proxy is opposed? I asked. We prefer consensus, she said, looking at my sister in a way that said she preferred payment. My sister took me by the elbow the way you take a stranger. Don't make this hard. You scheduled this today, I said, the words sour in my mouth. You thought I'd be too sentimental to read. She flushed. Someone has to be practical. The tour was as awful as tours of beautiful prisons always are. The rooms were clean. The staff was kind. The hallways smelled faintly of lemon and something else. Resignation, maybe, or lavender covering it. My mother squeezed my hand so hard my fingers tingled. I signed the visitor log, and half the line found its way into my notebook in the abbreviated shorthand I used when paperwork sprinted. I wanted to be furious, but I chose to be precise. That night I called Dell. You were right, I said. A head for paper is a weapon. Use it, he said, but don't forget your heart for people. That's the part they never see coming. I made 3 appointments the next day, one with an elder law attorney who wasn't my sister's, one with our family doctor, and one with a locksmith. By the next week, the locks were changed. My mother's medical proxy was updated with explicit limitations, and the lawyer had drafted a document that would become both shield and sword, a care contract. A care contract is not complicated. It says what you will do and when you will be paid and how everyone will behave. It is clean. It is a mirror. It doesn't turn daughters into saints or sisters into villains. It turns feelings into lines. I wrote it so my mother would pay me a modest amount from her own account for the care I provided, so there would be no suggestion later that I had stolen time or money. I wrote it with rates set by the county, with receipts pinned to the page like butterflies. I wrote in a clause that said no one would sign for my mother without me, unless a physician determined she lacked capacity at that moment. I wrote in a clause that said if anyone attempted to move her without that determination, the contract terminated and their contributions toward her care would be considered gifts, not loans. My sister laughed when she saw it. You're charging your own mother? I'm documenting what I do, I said. It protects her. It protects me. It protects you. She left the papers on my counter and took a photo of them with her phone, the way people take a photo of a sunset when they mean to insult the sky. 2 weeks later, she filed for temporary guardianship of our mother in family court, alleging that I was isolating her and mismanaging her funds. I know because the deputy sheriff handed me the papers at my door while my grandson stacked plastic cups into a wobbly tower behind me. Court date's here, the deputy said, tapping the corner. He looked past me and his face softened. Cute kid. I sat on the floor after he left and let my grandson crawl into my lap and pull at the papers like they were tissue. I breathed. I thought about my son in the back of an ambulance telling strangers that everything that mattered would fit inside his hands. I thought about a man with a badge in a NICU doorway and a voice like balm, and how I had wanted to believe him, and couldn't. I thought about my ledger and how sometimes the only way to balance it is to write in ink where other people have written in pencil. I hired a lawyer using money I had saved from notarizing. I gathered my proof file box and carried it like a newborn into that fluorescent courtroom. I wore my plainest suit and my softest shoes. My sister sat at the other table in a blouse that suggested innocence and a face that rehearsed it. She had a folder too. She had always liked symmetry. The judge was a woman with a silver streak in her hair that looked like a deliberate decision. She listened. She read. She asked questions about pills and showers and falls. She asked my mother who I was. My mother said my sister's name twice and then mine, puzzled, as if she were holding our baby pictures up to the light and trying to match the mouths to the names. The judge nodded gently. She asked my sister why she had failed to provide documentation of the funds she said she had been managing for my mother. My sister fluttered. She asked me to explain my care contract. It's simple, I said. I write down what I do. I don't need to be paid. I need to be believed. This is how you believe someone who doesn't have the energy to be charming while she's doing hard work. The judge took off her glasses. Do you have any evidence of conflict before the recent decline? She asked my sister. None, my sister said quickly. I opened my file box and took out the envelope, the CPS report. I didn't wave it like a flag. I handed it to the bailiff, who handed it to the judge, who read it, who looked at my sister, who looked at my mother, who looked at me. There was a silence in that room that had weight. It wasn't the shock. It was the end of pretending. Petition denied, the judge said. Medical proxy remains with the respondent under the current limitations. The court will appoint a neutral guardian ad litem to monitor care for 90 days. The petitioner is admonished not to take unilateral action without court approval. She could have used smaller words. She chose not to. Outside the courthouse, my sister hissed, "You didn't have to humiliate me." "I didn't," I said. "You did this. You called them. You set the table. You think you're so noble?" "No," I said. "I think I'm tired." She looked at me the way people look at strangers they have known their whole lives. She walked away. I watched her go and felt nothing that could be called triumph. Relief is not a song. It's a hallway of doors that no one can slam in your face anymore. I could end the story there, but revenge isn't always a slam. Sometimes it's a plan with good aims and a sharper edge. You wanted a twist. Here it is. The assets at the heart of my sister's urgency were not our mother's. They were mine. When my son was 23 and still living at home between shifts and certifications, I bought a duplex with a loan I should not have qualified for. Except life had finally decided to be kind, and the bank manager's wife was a nurse who remembered my son's tiny blue-lit face. The duplex was ugly and honest, a squat building with stubborn pipes and good bones. I rented the other unit to a nurse from the NICU who needed a quiet place to sleep after night shifts. I paid the mortgage with a notary's persistence and a grandmother's frugality. I replaced the roof with money that felt like a mountain and then felt like sky. I put the deed in a trust with a clause as old as my ledger. Anyone who had, in writing or in action, refused to assist me or my child in a medically necessary situation shall be excluded from any benefit, directly or through any challenge to capacity or guardianship. When my sister filed for guardianship, she made herself ineligible. When my mother's health declined further, and we had to decide how to pay for the parts of care the insurance didn't, I sold a small inheritance I hadn't told anyone about and kept the duplex. I turned one of the apartments into a respite suite for NICU families between home and hospital, at a rent that made no sense to my accountant and all the sense to me. I stocked the pantry with shelf-stable things that felt like love in a can. I put a corkboard in the hallway with a sign that said, "Write what you need," and a box of pens my sister found out at Thanksgiving. She had come because my son insisted and because her boys wanted to see their cousin. She walked through the side yard to smoke and saw the new brass plaque by the lower unit's door, the Del Alvarez Suite, in gratitude. She read it out loud, as if the letters might confess something. Del and Mrs. Alvarez had both passed by then, one after a nap and the other with all her grandchildren around her bed. I cried for them in separate months, and the same way. "What is this?" my sister demanded. "It's a place for people who can't go home yet," I said, "and the rest is none of your concern." She laughed, mean and small. "You named it after strangers." "They weren't strangers to me," You're ridiculous." "Maybe," I said. "Watch me." My mother's decline was a long, tender unraveling. She forgot people in little pieces. She knew the words to hymns long after she stopped knowing the names of babies. She never forgot that she liked tea. She died in her favorite chair with sunlight on her knees and my son sitting on the floor beside her reading a magazine article out loud about a rescue gone right. It was quiet, which is a blessing you don't recognize until you've heard the other kind. The funeral was merciful. The burial was merciful. The distribution of her estate was exactly as she had written it when she was still herself. The house to both daughters, the accounts split evenly, the dishes divided by agreement or coin toss. My sister wanted the coin toss. I wanted the mixing bowl with the crack I could run my thumbnail along. We both got what we wanted. After the last condolence casserole had been frozen or thrown out, my sister called. "I'm sorry," she said. It was a sorry without content. It drifted before it landed. "I miss her." "So do I." "I didn't call CPS," she said suddenly, as if the confession might travel back in time and rearrange the room. "You did," I said, not cruelly. "I have the report." She hung up. The next time she called, months later, her voice was softer. The mortgage had swallowed her second chance at a new life. Her boys were sullen in a way that meant they were normal and also departing. She had had surgery and she wanted help, the kind of real help that involves rides and soft food and someone sitting on your couch folding laundry and not calling it charity. I sat on her couch and folded laundry. I brought soup. I changed the light bulbs she kept ignoring. I wrote none of it in the ledger. I realized the ledger had become something else. You want to know where the revenge is? It's not in any court order. It's not in any clause. It's in the day she asked for help and I came. And when she said, "Why are you doing this?" I said, "Because when I needed you, you taught me that I couldn't count on you. And because of that, I built a life where I never had to." It's not forgiveness. It's structure. She cried into a dish towel that didn't deserve it. I wiped the counter. I left a note on the fridge with the medication schedule, because bad habits die harder than people do. Years later, when my grandson was old enough to keep secrets and tell truths, he asked me why the downstairs apartment has a funny plaque. We were watering the fern by the stairway, and the hose made a sound like someone laughing through their teeth. "I was alone once," I said, "and some people came when they didn't have to, so now I make it so other people aren't alone." "Did the people who didn't come get in trouble?" he asked, curious, not cruel, the way children are when they haven't yet learned to decorate their questions. "They got something better," I said. "They got a mirror they had to look into for a very long time." He nodded like he understood, which is the trick children do to kindly let you stop explaining. He pointed to the corkboard. "Can I write a note?" he asked. "I want to say we need more hot chocolate." "Write two," I said. "Someone else will be glad you asked." On my 70th birthday, my son didn't bring flowers. He brought a cake with my name in careful piping and a pair of dividers in a small box. "For your maps," he said, grinning. After we ate, he took me for a drive. He pulled up in front of the old NICU, where the windows always look like someone has polished the air. The hospital had built a new wing with a donor's wall. He led me by the hand to the third panel where names overlapped like petals. There it was, small and stubborn as my boy's stubborn lungs. The Ledger Fund. Emergency needs for NICU families, seated by a grandmother who knows what a winter bench feels like at midnight. "How?" I asked, the way I had once asked strangers for rides in Mercy. "Hazard pay," he said. "Overtime. And people who remember being held when they were not easy to hold." We started talking about it. Donations got made. Maya and I put in what we could. And someone told someone at the bank about your duplex and the suite. and how you never raised the rent for a nurse who needed to sleep. I touched the panel. It was cool and unembarrassed. I remembered a woman at a payphone, a man with a badge, a taxi driver's card. I remembered a voice saying, "It's late," and another saying, "No meter between a mother and her baby." I remembered how I'd thought revenge would feel like a slamming door, and how instead it felt like a door I had built, one that opened and closed when it should. That night, after everyone went home, I took my file box down from the closet shelf. I put the ledger on the table, the one with the ring burn from 1993 and the scratch from the time my son ran his toy car too fast into a coffee cup. I added one last entry, neat and plain: balance due, paid in full, by us. A week later, my sister called again. Her boys were men now, out in the world making choices that were their own and terrible in the good way. She said, "Do you think we can start over?" "No," I said, "but we can start fresh." "What's the difference?" "Starting over is pretending nothing happened. Starting fresh is washing the dishes and setting the table with what you have." She came that Sunday with a pie she didn't make and an apology she did. We sat on the porch. My grandson rode his bike in a circle that widened every time he came back around. My son stretched out on the step with his head against my knee like he used to when he was small and feverish. The upstairs tenant left a note on the corkboard that said, "Thank you for the spare key," and underneath it someone else had written, "We still need more hot chocolate." I tell you all this not to celebrate my own goodness. I am ordinary as dirt. I am messy and stubborn and sometimes cruel in my thoughts. But I have learned the difference between vengeance and architecture. Vengeance slams. Architecture stands. I built something that outlasted a slight. I took their refusals and laid them like bricks under someone else's feet. When people ask me now whether my family ever came through, I tell them yes, but not for me. They came through for themselves, which is what most people mean when they say family is everything. The rest of it, the kindness, the rescue, the warmth in winter, we built that with other hands. And when I pass the hospital on my grocery run, I look at the wing with the donor's wall, and I think of a night long ago when I sat on a cold bench and breathed like it was a job. I think of the baby who learned to breathe without the machine and then grew up to carry air to other people. I think of how the ledger sits on the shelf and how sometimes I still write in it, not to keep score but to remember the credits. The balance is always moving. That's how you know you're alive. Years from now, if you find yourself in a lobby with a water feature and a bowl of hard candy and a clipboard waiting for your name, I hope someone like me shows up and asks the right questions. I hope someone like Dell waits downstairs with a warm car. I hope someone like Mrs. Alvarez folds your socks without making you feel like a burden. And if the person who hurt you calls one day and asks how you are, I hope you've built enough to answer honestly without asking them for the scaffolding. This isn't about being better than anyone. It's about refusing to be less. It's about looking at a form that says irrevocable and understanding that some things are and some things you get to rewrite. It's about recognizing that a quiet, steady revenge is a life that doesn't need to ask permission. It's about owning the pen. It's about deciding where to sign. I still have the taxi driver's card. It sits in the ledger's last pocket, the ink faded to a soft gray. Sometimes I take it out and run my thumb over his name and think of all the nights someone drove me home when no one else would. Then I go downstairs, check the pantry and the suite, and write on the corkboard with a blue pen, "We're out of hot chocolate." And underneath, because old habits don't die, I add a note to myself. Buy two. Someone else will be glad you asked.
My grandma told me this story. I have many more stories. Subscribe so you don't miss the most interesting things.